How long was it that you were eventually imprisoned?
It was in my 10th year, nearly 10 years.
10 years, wait. How long of that time were you like part of the protest? Sorry, you might explain to people who don't know. When you get arrested, you can get
Mhm.
arrested and imprisoned as like a common criminal or political prisoner. So yeah, do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, well, basically, when we were caught, it was after the 1st of March 76. So before the 1st of March 1976, you could have got political status. It was won by Billy McKay, who I've mentioned earlier. He led a hunger strike. He was also involved in the Battle of St. Matthews, a bit of a hero, a local hero, Billy McKay. He was involved in the Battle of St. Matthews. He was one of the architects of the formation of the Provisional IRA. But in May 72, he led a hunger strike, which gained us political status as soldiers. And William Whitelaw at the time, the Secretary of State, granted political status in May 72 for captured combatants. But in 1976, the British reneged on all that, done an about turn, and introduced a three-pronged military strategy. It was formulated in London in the autumn of 75. And basically what they said was, we'll scrap political status, we'll not give them the recognition, we'll starve them of the publicity of this thing that they're soldiers. And what we'll do is we'll introduce a three-pronged military strategy called Ulsterization, Normalization, and Criminalization. Ulsterization was going to basically take the British Army out of the front line and put them into a supportive role and push the RUC and local forces like the Ulster Defence Regiment, indigenous or native forces, push them into the front line, let them die, and less body bags come back to London. So it was based on Vietnamisation. The Americans actually formulated that 2 years after the Tet Offensive of January 1968 in Vietnam, and Vietnamisation was introduced in 1970 by the US government. US Army, they said, right, there's too many body bags, come back to Washington, so we'll push native forces into the front line, which was the AVRN, the South Vietnamese Army, indigenous forces or native forces. Let them do the fighting, push them into the front line. And the US Army went back and went into a supportive role from 1970 right through until the end of that war in April 1975. So you had Ulsterization. The British took that from the American model and went, flip, instead of it being Vietnamisation, we'll have this Ulsterization, which meant British forces go into a supportive role, push the natives into the front role, which is the RUC and the Ulster Defence Regiment, native forces, and let them carry the con. And that's Ulsterization. Normalization was build leisure centres, build restaurants, build Greek, French, Indian restaurants, give a semblance of normality. That's called normalization, even in a war zone. Create this thing where there is no war here. It's all a fiction. There's just a law and order issue, and the only people to deal with that is policemen dealing with terrorists or mafia, gunmen, and criminalisation was to be their main plank. They reckoned it was to be the soft underbelly of the IRA, their prisoners. Strip them naked, disarm them, strip them naked, and put them into this new camp which was formed, called the Haste Blocks, or the Maze Prison they called it. It was still Long Cash, but they built this new camp called the Maze Prison, which was close. It butted on to the Long Cash concentration camp, where you had the political prisoners in cages and given all the privileges of POWs. This camp would be 8 concrete H blocks at £1 million a piece, with cells, and this was to be the knacker's yard of the IRA. This was to be the breaker's yard. Strip them individually, put them into these cells, and break them down, and criminalize them. They're not soldiers, but destroy them physically and psychologically. It was brutal, but it was ingenious strategy from the British. I have to give them that. It was brilliant strategy, but it was known as Ulsterization, Normalization, Criminalization. Those were the 3 points of the three-pronged military strategy, formulated in London, MI5 think tank, autumn 75. It came into effect on the 1st of March 76. Any prisoners coming in from now on, yous are criminals, and yous are getting into the H block system where the criminals belong. So when I arrived, I was sentenced to 14 years. Done caught in active service, went to the Murray Barracks, and then Castlereagh 5 days, then Crumlin Road Prison, and then eventually sentenced and sent to the H blocks. H block 5. I arrived there on the 5th of October 1977. Walked in, stripped, and then marched in to see the governor, completely naked. And the governor, Mr. Irwin, said, "Do you know where you are, Kearney?" I says, long cash? No, you're in the new prison, HMP Maze Cellular. Your number is 998. What's your number? I haven't got a number. Your number is 998. So you're also you're in an NCP block. That's a non-conforming prisoner block, or an NCP. And so we're advising you to put on the prison uniform, go to work. Are you prepared to do that? No. Why's that? Because I'm a soldier. No. There's no soldiers here, he said to me. He says, there's only the British Army. So there's no soldiers, there's only criminals, and that's what you are. I says, I was actually caught in active service trying to ambush a British soldier, UDR soldier. No. He says, that's a criminal conspiracy you were involved in. So see everything that you've been taught, Kearney? Forget about it, negate it. It's here. You're a criminal, and you're in a criminal prison for criminals. And that was the start of a long, drawn-out duel between me and the prison service. And it was an individual battle. Everybody had to fight individually here, because that's the way it was designed. They were going to break you individually, so everyone had to be strong. It wasn't like the RA fighting on the outside. You were fighting as an army out there. Now you're on your own, and you were being deliberately broken down psychologically and physically, individually on your own. So he says, I advise you to put on the uniform, because if you don't, then this is what awaits you. I says, what does that, if I don't wear the uniform, what does that entail? Right, he says, you'll be locked in a cell 24 hours a day, naked, and you'll not be getting out. I says, what about fresh air? No. The only fresh air you'll get is coming into the cell. No exercise, totally naked and put on a number 1 starvation diet. Total sensory deprivation. You think you could do 14 years like that? And I stupidly said, I think I'll try. I'll try. That was day 1. That was the 5th of October 77. I was A-Wing H Block 5, and that continued. I remained on the blanket protest for 4 years and 10 days, like that.
Okay,
so my greatest, people would say, what's the high water mark of your career? I got out of prison, I formed my own business, I had married, I had 3 children, but the high water mark of my career, looking back, was the blanket protest. 4 years and 10 days. That was a triumph. That was my forte. That's a great, for me, that's a great human achievement, if you know what I mean. They said, you'll not be able to do that. We'll throw everything but the kitchen sink at you. And I went, bring it on. And that's the type of steel will that you needed.
4 years of solitary confinement.
Solitary confinement, 4 years, 10 days.
No getting out of your cell, no out of prison. 4 years.
Yeah, and on a starvation diet. Enough food to keep you alive, but no more. No. You'll get a few chips, a slice of razor thin beef. Razor thin, you can see your eyes through it. You can see right through it. We call it razor meat, or razor thin meat. And a couple of chips. And then in the morning, soggy porridge. And the bread was stuck, 2 or 3 rounds of bread stuck in the porridge. You had to drag the bread out, soggy bread, and eat it, and then the porridge. But a cup of watery tea. And then that night, you could get, on a Friday, you would get fish with no fish, just the batter, and a few peas, and that'll do you. Oh my God, you were just constantly starving, gnawing away at you.
What does a person do to occupy your mind and stop yourself going insane for having that day repeated for 4 years? That's over 1,200 days. Like,
you have to fall back into your own resources. That's what I called it. You have to fall back into your own resources. You have to drain yourself of all emotion. That's the hardest part. I'd already done that on the outside, but you have to actually now stop feeling sorry for yourself, because you always have this self-pity. Poor me, I'm getting starved. Why me? That's disastrous. You need to stop feeling sorry for yourself, so you have to drain out all emotion, and you have to be steel-willed. You can't be steel-willed if you have a lot of emotion going on in there. Why is people picking on me? Why is people doing this? Why me? Why are they getting on with their lives outside? You have to adapt this attitude. You are a soldier, and I start behaving as a soldier. Soldier to me represents strength and discipline, and that gives me a context. So I am a soldier. I am not a civilian. Civilian to me means asking awkward questions, or why me? Why me? Why is this happening? Going to the prison officer, why are you beating me? Could you explain? I don't know why you're doing this. No, you're a soldier. You expect it. And that got me through those 4 years. Along with other tactics we all started formulating. One of them was walking up and down the cell. I had seen Papillon in 1973 at the cinema in Belfast, and I went, oh, I remember that. Steve McQueen, Dustin Hoffman. Steve McQueen was doing Papillon, and he had this thing about in Solitary Confinement. He kept walking up and down, but he used the maximum space, and I started doing that Started doing that, and the same thing. Started walking up and down a cell and hit my nose to the wall, back and forward, just the way Steve McQueen did it in Papillon in the film 1973. And he had ways of, weak tactics that he would have had. I started adapting too. He accepted it, and he accepted the situation that he was in, and I did the same. And making full use of the cell, walking up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, take a break, and then 10-minute break. You had no watch. So you imagine 10 minutes. You count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 minutes. Do it again, up and down. That went on all day. And then stories. Started telling stories. You had a cellmate, and he would say, "Do you know any stories to keep me from going and seeing?" And I started sort of digging into my resources, digging into my memories. It's pure escapism, but the escapism is a way of holding on to your sanity, and that's what kept you needed to remember, and you needed to remember good days which were, weren't all bad, and summer holidays. And he would ask me, "Had you any good summer holidays?" Here's me, "Yeah, went to Monaghan in 1972. The sun was shining, the birds were, yeah. Tell us about that, but take your time. Describe the scene." So he would have said, "Hold on, I want to lie down first. I want to make myself comfortable, and then I want you to describe in detail that particular summer holiday." And you went, "This is nuts," But you had to say, well, the scene opens where there's a clear blue sky, the sun is shining, and the birds are right. And here's me. "Do you get the picture?" Yeah, got it. Keep going." So that's what was going on. Things like that, telling stories, sing songs out the door, walking up and down the cell, and I went on and on and on.
You were in a cell with someone else?
Yes.
For the 4 years, you and one other guy?
Yeah.
After the 4 years, what changed?
I know what you're saying. I wasn't total solitary confinement. I know what you're saying. Yeah, no, you were locked in a cell with two guys. There was two of you and another guy. But there was occasions of solitary confinement. That's when they took you out of the punishment block. If you for any misdemeanor, they took you down. It was a separate building outside in the camp, but it had two wings, and it was known as the punishment block. And you would have been in total solitary confinement for up to a week there.
After that 4 years, what the rest of the 6 years, you then had political prisoner status, or?
Well, we won most of we got of the 5 demands, which we called political status. It was the right to, not to wear a prison uniform. We gained that at the end of the hunger strike of 1981, and then from there we worked on other stuff. So by September 1983, we got all our demands, the 5 demands, which formulated political status.
Okay,
but it had to come to the hunger strike because conditions were so bad, and we were living on our own excrement. We had a smear excrement on the cell. You're aware of that? Yes.
Yeah, I've heard that that you were supposed to slap out, and that was one of the ways of protesting, that you wouldn't put out the bucket.
Yeah. So you put the excrement on the wall, you smeared it on the cell walls, and then you put your urine out every night about 9 o'clock under the door. They flooded the wing, then they squeezed it off, and then basically you had the maggots coming out of the corner in the summer. It was freezing in the winter. The worst thing that they did, from my point of view, was in April 1979, to put these sheets of steel over the cell. A bit like what happened to Papillon. They've done that with him.
I haven't seen that film.
They go one further. The torture, I call it the torture of the tortured. They weren't happy enough beating you, and they did do that. They come in and they would beat you. They would beat you hard, 3 or 4 of them, and for no reason. It was just random, and they would sexually assault you, by inserting their finger up your anus and then into your mouth. They did that, and they would starve you out with giving you very little food, and then they would throw you across a table and stick their finger up your anus with a rubber glove or a surgical glove, and then into your mouth. They'd done the worst. They were the worst of the worst. They were war criminals. You know,
I was going to say what they're doing there amounts to
war crime.
It's crimes against humanity type of stuff.
Yeah. And I at one time they'd done the table search was September 78 after they rammed their finger up my anus, and then they were slapping me and kicking me and punching me in the head, and I climbed off the table totally naked, and I was like, I felt violated, and I said to them, why don't you think you're brave? I says, why don't you take your chances at the front line like me? He says, oh, big rough tough provo are you? I says, that's how we operate. He says, you have to strip us naked and then do that on us, but it doesn't take one man, it took 5 years to do that. He says, you're going to pay for that. Oh, are you threatening us? And I did that with the finger. I did that, and they knew what that meant, trigger finger. Oh, you threaten us? I says, you're going to pay for that. This will not go unpunished. You're going to pay for that. He says, F you Finian, Provo, you know. So it became personal, and the violence against us became so horrific, where they were beating you, sexually assaulting you, putting you underwater in hot tubs of water. In December 78, they near drowned me in a tub of water, a bathtub. They were taking you to the punishment block and beating you there. So the beatings they weren't with knuckle dusters or nothing like that. Sometimes they used the bat and sometimes not. But you had to run a gauntlet. Every 9 days you were sent across from one wing to another, so that they could clean the cell, because the cell became like a farmyard after 9 days. It was just unbelievable, hard to describe. The smell and the sight of excrement on the ceilings, on the walls. The excrement was in your nails. You were eating food. You were getting worms. You were having dysentery, and you weren't washing. And then they were coming in randomly, hitting you over the head with a steel pocket, or hitting you with a baton, or trying to crush your ribs, just kicking you, punching you, and then during the wing shifts every 9 days you had to put you across a table, or else use the mirror search. The mirror was a mirror super glued onto a piece of sponge. They would kick you over the mirror, and then what they called stargazing. They would look up your anus to see if you were carrying contraband. Sometimes they ran the finger up your arse, and then into your mouth. It was just pure humiliation, and total sensory deprivation from April 79, where they actually cut out the sunlight, actually put sheets of steel over the cell window so you couldn't see out, and it became suffocating, especially when you were going to the toilet and trying to put excrement on the wall. There was hardly any fresh air coming in. They put not only the sheets of steel on the inside, but also cages on the outside. It was just incredible. Torture of the tortured, I call it. And that was from about April 79 in my block, H4. And so it dragged on and on and on. We weren't forgiven in. They weren't forgiven in. So it came to the point of a hunger strike.
Sorry, just to go back before I forget. You mentioned that time when they had been assaulting you, and you you gave them that threat. Were any of those threats followed through? Yeah.
Once we issued a threat, they knew that we weren't like the loyalists. The loyalists would issue veiled threats and do nothing about it. They would threaten a hunger strike but not go on it. They would threaten a blanket protest but not do it. They hadn't got the will to win. They hadn't got that steel will. We had it on the outside. We brought it into the inside, and the pivotal battle was going to be this defining moment, the Battle of the H blocks. And they felt we're going to finally crush the provisional IRA inside the prisons. And we were going, no, you won't. No, you're not. Yes, the number 2 governor came in, and he said to me, he was called Albert Miles, and he said, Kearney, you're a criminal. I says, no, I'm not, I'm a soldier. Here we'll go again. So he says, I'm ordering you 28 days lost remission, 28 days, blah, blah, blah. And then eventually he took a personal interest. He came in to the H3 in August 1978. He lined all the screws. How I know this is because I had a conversation in 1983 or 84 with a prison officer who was actually on parade. We became friends. It was over. We got political status. He was more liberal in talking to me. And he says, I just happened to say to him, Joe, what was all that about? He says, were you on the blanket yourself, Mr. Kearney? I said, yeah. Oh. He says, what block? I says, H block 4. He says, oh, I was in H3. I says, what was it all about, Joe? This is a prison officer who had become a born-again Christian. And he says, well, in August 78, we were all told to line up and parade. And the number 2 governor came in. It was Albert Mills. And he addressed us and says, the government are fed up with these protesting prisoners. They're trying to get this policy of criminalisation finally wrapped up, get them into criminal uniform. He says, so it's dragged on. And so the governor have told us to tell you, do whatever it takes to break them. You can beat them, you can starve them out, you can do whatever it takes, but get them in the uniform. And that's by Christmas 78, that's your demarcation line. We want this wrapped up. We want them in criminal uniforms, and this so-called blanket protest ended. And you can do what you like. I said, how did you feel, Joe, when they said that? He says, we couldn't believe it. We hated you anyway as Fenians. But even better, we were given a blank check that we could do whatever we want. And so he says, that was August 78. We had up to Christmas to do it. So we went berserk. He says, the next swing shift, I actually seen 2 prison guards jammed in the cell doorway to get at the 2 streakers, as he called us, blanket men. We were blanket men, but they called us tramps or streakers. He says, I actually seen that was the hatred we had for you, Kearney. 2 prison officers were jammed in the cell opening to get at the prisoners. That's the hatred we had. Rammed their heads into the grills, punched, beat. Oh. He says, it was like a turkey shoot. I says, Joe, you did that? Oh, yes. I admit I did that. But he says, I'm born again Christian now. He says, I've seen the error of my ways. And he says, by the way, that will never happen again. The Prison Officers Association wouldn't allow that to happen. I says, why not? He says, because we were duped. He says, the government duped us. He says, at the end, we lost, yous won. And yous got political status, and we were caught in the middle of that. He says, we were just used as cannon fodder. He says, the government broke. It didn't support us, and they gave you political status in the end. We were duped. That's how he felt.
Were prison officers shot sometimes off duty as well?
Yeah. Well, that particular governor, the number 2 governor, which was Albert Miles, the guy who issued that Christmas 78, the OC of H3 went out and said to him, "You've been conducting some terror campaign here." He says, "And what?" He says, "Well, you have to be, someone's going to have to be accountable for this horror of men getting beat and everything that's been happening." And Miles turned around to the OC of H3 in December, or sorry, it wasn't December, it was around about October. Yeah, October. And he said, "See, anything that happens, I stand by my staff. I'm the ones giving the orders. I'm the ones going to make sure that you go into the criminal uniform and are broke." He says, "Well, on your head be it." So on the 28th of November 1978, he was having tea that Sunday night in North Belfast, and 2 IRA volunteers went and shot him dead. He was shot twice in the stomach and then shot twice through the head, and he died with a cup of tea in his hand. And that was Albert Miles. How did I feel when the word came in that Albert Miles, Fourshay boss, he's dead? Everyone just ran for the piss pots, drained them, and started banging the cell doors. It was we were triumphalist over it. Couldn't believe it, because he was the main instigator of that torture, and he had paid a heavy price for it. The next day, the Screws' morale hit rock bottom, and our morale sky high. And that's the truth. There was none of this, "Oh, that's terrible." No, how we felt at the time was, "You need to stop it." "No, we're not stopping it." "Well, you're going to pay a price." "And so what? What are you going to do?" But the IRA did it for us. They shot him dead.